About 4 years ago, when I was in college, I went to a university that was about 2 hours away from my girlfriend's college. I would drive down to her campus sometimes on Friday afternoons, and then we would hang out for the weekend. I would typically leave to go back on Sunday night. Usually I would try to leave by 10 p.m. at the latest on Sunday nights to get back to my dorm on campus by midnight. I had a 9 a.m. class on Mondays after all. But many times, I would stay later than I should. One time I stayed until nearly midnight and then began driving back to my campus. Unfortunately, not long after I started driving back, maybe like 20 minutes, I began to feel very sleepy. I kept going and hoped that I would feel more awake, but I was only getting more and more tired as I went on. I was starting to struggle to keep my eyes open, and obviously, it was becoming a very dangerous situation. Then, I decided that I needed to stop and do something to help myself wake up. Maybe get an energy drink or something. I kept my eyes open to the sides of the road to see if I would pass by any gas stations or rest stops. I knew that I wouldn't be able to make it much farther without falling asleep. At the next exit, I took it, and I hoped that I would come across something. The exit led me down to a quiet road, and not too far down it appeared to be a gas station. I was really happy to see it. I pulled into the parking lot, but when I did, it appeared that the store part of the gas station was closed. The lights were off inside, and there were no cars in the parking lot whatsoever. I even got out and tried the door, but it was locked. I went back to my car then and got inside. I was still extremely tired. That's when I just sat back and closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking all that clearly from being so tired, and I guess I felt that maybe I could take a brief 15-minute nap or something. All I know is when I closed my eyes, it felt so good. I started to drift off to sleep, and I was out within probably 15 seconds. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to see a car was parked next to me. I was groggy, and I almost went right back to sleep at first, but I had a bad feeling. The feeling was almost like I needed to get away from there and I was in danger. I looked at the car that was parked next to me. It was a silver sedan, and it looked to be about 20 years old or so. Then the driver's door opened. I felt a little bit suspicious because they parked right next to me out of all the other spaces in the parking lot. I could barely see the person as they walked around the car over to mine. When they made it around, I finally saw them. It was a man wearing a white sweatshirt with his hood up, and he had on like a type of mask that covered his whole face. It was like a costume mask of some sort, but I didn't recognize the character. When he approached my driver's window, I had no interest in sticking around. I started my car up right then, and as I did, the man attempted to open my driver's door. My door was locked though, and I put my car into reverse and then backed up and drove away from him. I saw him then start sprinting back to his car as I was speeding out of the parking lot. Suddenly, I was wide awake, and I didn't feel like sleeping at all. I sped onto the road and then back onto the freeway. I wasn't driving recklessly or anything, but I was definitely pushing the speed limit. When I got back onto the freeway, I saw that a car was merging right behind me, which happened to be the silver car. I had no plans to try to outrun them, and I drove at a normal pace. The guy sped up until he was right behind me. He got within probably 5 feet of the back of my car, and he stayed at that pace for a good minute or so. There were no other cars on the freeway at all. This area was really not that populated. In fact, most of the drive from my girlfriend's college to mine was just farms and woodland. I don't think I had seen another car the entire time that I was on the freeway. I sped up just a little bit, and as soon as I did, the guy behind me did as well. I switched lanes back and forth once, and he did the same. Then he sped up and hit the back end of my car. I couldn't believe it. He then crashed into it again, but this time harder. I think this guy had to be crazy or something. Then he backed off and then went forward and hit me for a third time. This time it was so hard that I nearly lost control of my car entirely and spun out. I sped up then because I was desperate. But as I did, I noticed way up ahead that there appeared to be a semi-truck. I kept speeding up, and so did the guy behind me. When we got sort of close to the semi, the guy behind me then switched lanes and sped off, passing both me and the semi-truck. He probably went over 100 miles per hour when he passed the truck. I slowed back down again once I made it to the semi-truck. The truck honked at me, probably seeing the damage on the backside of my car. I slowed down more and then called the police about the situation. I'm not sure why I didn't think to call the police sooner, but it's probably best, or I might have crashed or something trying to handle a phone and driving. An officer came out and pulled me over, where I was able to give my side of the story. He had me take the next exit and then stayed with me while I called my roadside service. I basically ended up staying up all night from waiting for my car to get towed and everything. I'm not sure what ever happened to the driver of the other car, whoever he was. I would recommend everybody to not drive late at night unless you have to, and especially never drive if you're tired. I used to work at a bar, and the story takes place during that time. Because of the job, I would typically work really late into the night. One time I got done at almost 3 o'clock in the morning. It was maybe a 10 to 15 minute drive back, which was not too bad at all. All of the roads that I would take were also very quiet roads, like no highways or freeways. When I left work that night, though, I had completely forgotten about the fact that I needed gas. The light had come on while I was driving to work, but I didn't stop and instead told myself that I would get gas on the way back. Unfortunately, it had been a long day, and it never came to my mind. For some reason, I didn't even pay attention to the light on the dashboard. So when I was about halfway home, my car stopped running. I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, and I knew before I was even fully stopped that I had run out of gas. I felt so stupid for not getting it earlier. I was on a very quiet road and hadn't seen another car at all. The area that my car was stopped in was covered in dense woods on both sides, but I knew that there would be a gas station coming up ahead. I had driven the route to and from work many times, and I believed the gas station was about 1 mile up the road. It would take me probably 15 to 20 minutes to walk there, but I didn't see what other option I had. I couldn't call somebody I knew because they would all be asleep at this hour. Things were very quiet. I opened my car door and heard a few crickets chirping in the night. Then, I went to the back and got out my gas container. I was a little bit creeped out with having to walk along the woods for so long. I walked around my car to the front of it and then got on the shoulder of the road and began walking. When I had made it maybe 10 feet in front of my car, though, I heard a noise in the woods. It sounded like maybe an animal or something at least 20 feet into the woods and a little ways up. Judging by the sound, though, it had to be a pretty big animal or maybe even a person. It startled me a little bit, and I stopped and looked into the woods to see what it was. It was really dark, but I barely saw some leaves and branches moving in the woods. I couldn't see what it was, though. The noises continued and then slowed down and stopped. I remained where I was, listening and watching the area of the woods that I had heard the noises from. Now it was just silent again. I found it pretty strange, but I decided to keep walking towards the gas station. When I did, things were quiet at first, but when I made it maybe 100 feet more, I heard the noises again. They were now way behind me and near my car, but still in the woods. I turned around and looked behind me to see what appeared to be a man emerge from the wooded forest and approach my vehicle. He appeared to be holding some sort of stick in his hand. I started to walk back, and I shouted at him, asking what he was doing and saying that that was my car. The guy was like 5 feet away from my car, and he then turned and looked at me. I was far away, but the guy looked crazy. He then turned his whole body to face me and started sprinting at me with a stick still in his hand. I started running. There was nothing else to do in that situation. I ran as fast as I possibly could to get away from him, and thankfully I had a pretty good head start of around 100 feet. When I had run full speed for as long as I possibly could, I slowed down and didn't hear the man behind me. I turned around and didn't see him. I was running so fast I wasn't really paying attention to hear if he was behind me, plus he had been so far back. He must have stopped chasing me and went back into the woods or something. I walked quickly all the way up to the gas station and finally made it. Unfortunately, the convenience store part of the gas station was closed, but the pumps were still open at least. I was able to get a few gallons of gas in my small container. Then, I turned back around and headed to my car. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty nervous to have to walk back, and the whole time I was fearing that the man might pop out of the woods at any moment. I walked as fast as I could with the gasoline in my hand, and it took me probably about 15 minutes. Finally, I could see my car again, but as I got closer, I realized that there appeared to be glass on the ground. When I made it back, I saw my driver's window and the back window of the car were both smashed. I looked inside, and nothing was out of place. Not that I had much in the car anyways. I was furious, but also felt sort of scared. I began to open the fuel cap and start to put the gasoline in the car. That's when I suddenly heard more noises in the woods. They were pretty far back, but were getting closer. I hurried as fast as I could to pour as much gasoline in my tank as possible, and then ran to my driver's door and got inside. I then started the engine and sped away from there, seeing the man emerge from the woods again in my rearview mirror as I pulled away. I drove back home and called the police about it. My insurance was thankfully able to cover the window, despite the crazy situation. I don't know if the police ever found the guy, though. I also wonder what his plans were and what he was doing out in the woods in the middle of the night. This happened when I was much younger. I want to say it was the summer after I graduated from high school. The situation was that I had just hung out with one of my good friends that night. We would hang out all the time during the summers. I dropped him off at his house because he didn't have a working car at the time, and I then started to drive back to my parents' house. My friend lived about 15 minutes away, which is farther than I liked, but also not too bad. By this time it was almost midnight. The roads were very quiet, and I only saw a few other cars driving. I made it maybe 5 minutes out of the 15 and then saw that the light up ahead was red. I slowed down and came to a stop. The area that I lived in was pretty quiet. It was a little more rural, and they didn't really have any sidewalks on these particular roads. People pretty much used cars to drive everywhere. As I sat at the red light, I remembered that this particular light always took forever. I would sometimes sit there for what felt like 5 minutes before it would turn green. I'm sure it wasn't actually 5 minutes, maybe like 2 or 3, but it always felt so long, especially late at night when nobody else was on the roads. There were times that I even considered just driving through it because the roads would be so empty. Of course, I never actually seriously considered it, but my point is that the light was ridiculous. So as I was sitting there waiting for it to turn green, I noticed a guy start walking from where this gas station was on the corner. He then started crossing the road in front of me where a crosswalk would be. This was weird for several reasons. Number one, why was there a guy walking on these roads because I had never seen it before? And number two, why was this guy walking on these roads at almost midnight? The guy had really short hair and wore a no-sleeve shirt and had a cigarette in his mouth. His hands were in his pockets, and he crossed the street in front of my car. After he had made it past my car, though, he suddenly stopped. I had expected him to just keep walking. He was on my passenger side and like 5 feet away from my car and in front of it. Then he turned around and faced me, taking a couple of steps closer. I got a bad feeling like he was going to come up to my window or something, but he didn't. At first, at least. He stood there right next to my car, looking at me for like 20 seconds. I was hoping that the light would just turn green already. It felt extremely awkward. Then, the man moved closer, right up to my front passenger's window. I thought he would knock on my window, but instead, he just opened the door. Apparently, I had forgotten to lock it. The guy then started to enter my vehicle, and before I knew it, he grabbed my arm. I reacted, trying to shove him away from me. I asked what he was doing, but he just kept trying to overpower me. His knees were on the passenger seat, and his feet were dangling out of the car while his arms were struggling with mine. I kept pushing at him over and over, and then, finally, he slipped a little. I pushed him again, and he fell down onto the middle console. The guy then got out of the car for a moment, and when he did, I put my car into drive and sped off. I remember seeing the guy standing there as I drove away. It all happened so fast that I was sort of in shock. When I felt safe enough, I then called the police. They investigated what they suspected to be an attempted carjacking. Unfortunately, I never heard if they found the guy or not.